Hello and welcome to The Print. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor, and today I have two really esteemed guests who are perfect to talk about the topic at hand. And what is the topic at hand? It's about our poverty line, how we measure poverty, do we need to revise it, and also a little bit on what is the poverty level in India right now. We have with us Dr. Pronab Sen, who is currently the chairman of the Standing Committee on Statistics, and he's our former chief statistician of India. And we have Dr. Surjit Bhalla, who is a former executive director at the IMF and a former member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Thank you, both of you, for joining us.
Pleasure.
So now I know that both of you have talked previously about how we need a new poverty line. But can India get away with simply just raising the poverty line, or do we need a new framework to measure poverty? So Dr. Bhalla, let me start with you on this.
Well, look, I don't understand what a framework means. The reason to have a poverty line and to have a new poverty line is so that you can, it's like the GDP number.
Right.
You've got to find out what's going on. And you can't have a series of statistics. So it's around the world, and it's been there actually for at least 70 years that people have measured poverty according to one number. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the only number that goes. There's a whole plethora of data that comes along with that number.
Right.
So it's a communication device, it's an information device, and it's a device very important for policy making. So, yes, now coming to the second part of your question, so that's what I consider as a framework. I mean,
Okay.
and absolutely we need a new poverty line, because the existing poverty line essentially says that we have eliminated extreme poverty. And extreme poverty is defined by the World Bank, but you can have your own, including by the Tendulkar poverty line of 2009, that basically, according to the latest data, that it is less than 2% of the population.
Right.
Now, what's the point of having policies dictated towards the bottom 2%? And that's why you need a poverty line, so that you have a respectable number or informative for policy purposes. And my guess is, the very first poverty line was developed here in India, and that showed about 45% poor.
When was this?
This was Dandekar Rath back in the 70s.
1969.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the first developed country poverty line was developed in the US, which showed about 20% poor. And then you had the third poverty line, which was developed by the World Bank for developing countries at large. These two were for the two specific countries.
Right.
And that showed about 45% poor.
Okay.
So this is now going back 50 years. And what countries have, around the world, poverty has been continuously measured and has dropped radically, because with growth that happens. And countries have moved forward with new poverty lines. And I guess that's the position we are in today.
Okay, and Dr. Sen, do you agree that just simply raising the poverty line will be enough?
Sharad, let's be very clear.
I didn't say it would be enough, but we need to raise
But we need to raise it, right?
Yeah.
We don't have a poverty line. We have a World Bank poverty line, but we don't have a national poverty line.
Okay.
Because the Tendulkar Committee poverty line, in a sense, ceased to exist from 2014.
Okay.
And it's there in the academic literature. Surjit works on it, I work on it. But officially, as a nation, we do not have our own poverty line. All right? So we need a poverty line.
Absolutely.
We can decide to adopt the World Bank poverty line, but I have serious reservations about it. Very serious reservations. So we need a policy to develop a poverty line for India.
Okay.
Okay? We may adopt an existing poverty line, but at least we have to take a call on it. Right?
Okay.
So when you say, can we just raise the poverty line? If you're talking about the World Bank poverty line, that's pointless.
Or even the Tendulkar one?
Well, the Tendulkar one is a different ballgame, and that we can discuss. Because I think there are issues there. But at least, when one talks about poverty is a very emotive term.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's not something you can just throw around it loosely. And whatever poverty line you use should resonate with people, saying, yes, this is a good way to define poverty.
Right.
Right? That's a debate we need to have. That, in a sense, that's the framework that Surjit is talking about. And we may disagree on this. The calorie-based poverty line was accepted because it said a minimum amount of food as determined by nutrition experts.
Right.
Okay? And that's it.
That actually was my next question, that so far we have been pegging poverty to the calorie intake. But given that we have so many free food programs at the center, at the states, food or the lack thereof isn't as big an issue as it was when they came up with these measures. So do we need to move past calories in terms of how we peg the poverty line?
We will eventually get there, but we aren't there yet. Okay? I'll tell you the reason. Even today, food comprises of nearly 40% of not the poor's consumption, but of the average consumption in the country.
Right.
Okay? Now, 40% is a large number. Everything else is second order of small. So food is still not a bad way of pegging it. As of now, there will come a time, like in the United States, food is about 15 to 16% of the average expenditure.
Right.
At that point, food becomes irrelevant for defining poverty. But we are not there yet. So I don't think food is a bad way of going about it, but this is something we need to discuss.
Of course.
Yeah.
And Dr. Bhalla, you had some points here.
No, I mean, I think there seems to be confusion between food and calories. Now, calories was there as the measure of poverty for a short period of time.
Right.
And then it got quickly dispensed with everywhere in the world. Okay. And one of the most influential people in dispensing with it was Sukhatme, our own P.V. Sukhatme, back in, I think it was the mid-70s, or where he showed that, there was a lot of inter-individual variation in calorie consumption. Second, and there was a time in the 70s when the FAO, Government of India, everybody came up with a poverty line based on how much calories people were consuming. And in 1973, there was a Haynes very detailed survey in the US about calorie consumption.
Right.
And the data showed that and based on the caloric norms that were prevalent for the US, for developed countries, FAO, etc., that something like 86% of women were nutritionally deprived if you based it on calories.
Right.
Okay. So that's number one. So it is no longer an issue, at least I don't see it. As far as food is concerned, that is obviously an important concern, an important aspect about poverty. And here we should remember that the US poverty line, which I had mentioned, came out on the basis of the food consumption at the 33rd percentile.
Right.
So the income corresponding to the people at the 33rd percentile of food was considered poor. And that, if you will, has stayed the same in the US since 1965.
Right.
And that shows, basically at that time it was about 20%. It soon dropped to about 12% and is now ranged in the 8 to 12% ever since.
So then you are saying that the new poverty line that we come up with needs to still be pegged to calories? Because
No. I mean, let's be clear. I think Surjit in a sense, glossed over the point. So far as calories are concerned, even 50 years ago, if you looked at calorie consumption, it started from a relatively low level, climbed up, went up to about 2,600 in rural areas, and then started coming down. Okay? So beyond a particular income, your calorie consumption actually comes down. So the way we defined a poverty line is you read from the bottom upwards. When you came to the class that was consuming 2,400 or 2,100, you picked that category of people and said their consumption is the poverty line. Okay?
I see.
People above that were consuming less.
But they were still not considered poor.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Because if you use the poverty line, you as calorie as the cutoff, you'd get very, very strange results.
I see. So, okay, now if we're talking about the various metrics that go into measuring whether someone's poor or not, Niti Aayog came out with its multidimensional poverty index. And since we didn't at the time have the consumer expenditure survey, that was the way that we could look at poverty. Do you feel that it's a robust measure of poverty in the country?
Well, it's not a measure of poverty. Right?
Okay.
Poverty has a very specific connotation. It is current income. What multidimensional poverty index measures is mostly assets.
Right.
Okay? Now, assets can come from all sorts of things, but most particularly, it comes from history. It comes from what your parents have done.
That's right.
All right? It doesn't measure your current standard of living. So the two are different. Ideally, you should have both measures. If we can bring them together, you would get a more complete measure of poverty.
So including income
But
in
the multidimensional poverty index is not a poverty.
Okay.
Okay? It is a deprivation index.
I
You don't
see.
have a house, you don't have education, you don't have this, you don't have that. It doesn't say anything about your income.
I see. So this poverty
This
versus
is where
deprivation.
I completely agree.
Oh, you do agree?
Yeah. Multidimensional poverty index is not a poverty index, and in my view, it's much ado about nothing. It has very little information content. It doesn't communicate. There is absolutely right. It depends. I mean, if you look at their schooling variable, education, which has education and health has about a third of the weight. It's I've yet to look at a multidimensional poverty index and say, oh, I learned something about this particular society.
I
No,
see.
I mean, he's right. Education, right? Here's the fun thing about the multidimensional poverty. If you don't have children, it's a plus for you. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
because
it's,
you aren't spending on education at all.
No, because
You're not sending kids to school.
because if you had a child and he wasn't going to school, you'd be poor. If you don't have a child, ergo he must have been going to school.
I see.
So you get a brownie point for not having a child.
I see. So that then is in the framework of how they are measuring these things as well. The questions that
There,
they're
No, I
asking.
think
there are
the question
serious
is wrong.
definitional issues.
The index is wrong.
Yeah.
I see. So now, and do you feel that it will get strengthened in some way if they can incorporate income into it?
Well, in any case, firstly, it has to be strengthened in and of itself.
Right.
I mean, that's a debate we are not having. The whole discussion has essentially been dominated by one institution. It's a debate we need to open up. I don't think it's a bad idea, but the index that we have at present is not a good one.
Okay.
Let me come in there on, you slipped in income.
Yes.
And we haven't had or don't have an income distribution survey. And I think in the 2006 to 2009, Pronab was also in the discussions at the Tendulkar Statistical Commission. I had suggested that, look, it was high time we moved towards at least having an income survey.
Right.
And it fell on deaf ears, particularly.
No,
at
it
the-
didn't fall on deaf ears. We did an experiment, we did a pilot, and we got garbage. Because
see.
people are willing to tell you how much they spent. They are not willing to tell you how much they earned.
I think, look, this is,
So, well,
there are many people who think that the consumption data is garbage. But it is the case, I believe, that the income distribution survey, if they were to do exactly parallel to the consumer expenditure survey, will add a lot of value, will add a lot of information, and will not be without its measurement problems. So to think that you can do a survey and not have measurement problems, you're in la la land. Second, I think time has come around the world, and hopefully it'll encroach into India as well. But many countries are now merging or learning from national data, national accounts data, as well as the survey data. So we have stayed away from any kind of association with national data. And that unfortunately has a history behind it, but be that as it may. But I think, as I like to say it often, zamana bahut badal gaya. And a lot of the attitudes prevail from the 50s, and saying we can't do this, we can't do that, national accounts, blah, blah, blah. So I think now this is the information age. Data is the new oil, as we all recognize. And survey data, as I mentioned, is not perfect. National accounts data is not perfect. But administrative data is not perfect. But now we need to graduate from our ancient thinking that we'll only rely on survey data for information about very important policies. On poverty measurement, it wasn't until, there was a study that I was involved in, and while I was ED at the fund, interacted with a bank, and they believed that food subsidies should not be part of the poverty calculation. This is as recently as 3 years ago. And now it's become de rigueur that yes, food subsidies, since you're obviously getting some consumption out of it, your standard of living, whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely.
So it should be. So I think this is where we are around the world, you should see, in countries with the best data in the world, the US. There is an attempt to marry the two sets of information. Or three sets of information: administrative data, national accounts data, as well as survey data.
Right. Now, we're talking about data in India in particular. We recently got the household consumption expenditure survey after quite a delay. And you're talking about having an income survey as well. But is all of this moot if we don't have a census, an updated census?
Okay. Two separate questions that you have.
Because you need a denominator if you have a numerator.
No. But that is not to say we shouldn't have a census. We must have a census. But the census is not there for informing you about the consumption or income.
But just how many people there are in the country?
Look, there is, as to how many people there are in the country, there are many, many minds working on it. There are fertility rates, there is health, so therefore there are age profiles. The UN Population Division publishes this every 3 years, updates the data, all the way from 1950, where we have historical data, to 2100. And they are much better than even our census would be if it had been done every year, because census also can have some measurement errors. So the point being, look, we need a census, but for many different reasons than to help in informing us about consumption or about the number of people.
I disagree.
Okay.
One of the critical elements of any survey is whether or not the sample you've chosen is representative. Okay? And we use the census data to select the sample, right? If I don't have a census, so I'm using at the moment the 2011 census, right? We are already selecting samples which are becoming less and less representative. Till we get the next census, the representativeness of our samples just becomes worse and worse and worse. Right? So census is critical just to choose the sample, if for no other purpose. Because otherwise I cannot even talk about representativeness.
Okay. And now this question might be a little out of syllabus, but since we are talking about consumption data, a lot of economists talk about how the GST collection data is kind of indicative of the consumption levels in the country because it's a consumption-based tax. What do you feel about the fact that the ministry has discontinued the monthly release of the detailed data? It'll give out the gross number, but the state-wise breakup and all of that.
We still don't understand why they are doing this. Because that data would make life easier, not just for measuring consumption or incomes or whatever. It just makes calculation of a lot of things so much easier. We have no idea about interstate flows at the moment.
Right.
GST data gives you that. Right? So there are all kinds of really, really important economic activities which the GST data would help, but the GST is simply not releasing
I
data.
completely agree. Look, again, I don't know why they are not public. I can't think of, especially tax data, detailed tax data, which we know is reasonably accurate, much better than survey data even. But the surveys cover everybody. The tax data is different. But absolutely, and the point is, what I don't understand is that information processing, information data availability, etc., is huge now.
Absolutely.
Okay, and the next step is how to use, or as Pronab is saying, how to use that efficiently. You can answer several questions. Let graduate students look at it, which is what happens in the rest of the world. The data gets released, and then they figure out all kinds of things that the policymaker had never even thought of.
Yep.
So, to argue against not publishing data or to argue for not publishing data is, to me, an argument that has very little basis in either logic or policy. So, I don't know why they are doing that. They must have a reason, but doesn't mean their reason is going to be a good one.
I've interacted with them. They're like a stone wall. They don't give you a reason.
Yeah.
They give you an answer,
Right.
which is no.
And okay, so now coming back to the poverty debate, just like with inflation or with GDP, we've seen that a single number for the country is not necessarily representative for the entire country. So even with poverty, do we need to move from a single national number to maybe 4 regional numbers?
Sharad, you're misquoting.
Okay.
First of all, whether the HCS data was now released or the NSS data has been released, it's never a single number. You get a number for each state.
Right.
You get a number for each rural areas. You get a number for each urban areas. And then there's information in there to get a number, approximate number for each district. So, it's not one number is what, look, in the information age, you want one number, like the GDP. GDP is, what's your growth rate? 7.8. But how many numbers go to generate that number? And how else are you, you are a journalist, a superb journalist. Can you imagine? So you need, it's not one number, but you will choose, I will choose, okay, what's happening in Bihar?
Right.
Okay, take the labor force participation rate, another controversial little data. In Bihar, I don't understand. The Bihar female labor force participation rate has been somewhere around 10% for decades. Now it's gone to 20. I don't know what's going on. Okay? But the point is that data has some information, then people work on it, etc., and enlighten. So, and as I keep stressing, I'm a big believer in data, but doesn't mean that whatever data spitted out is correct. So therefore, you need experts like Pronab, etc., myself maybe sometimes, to look at the data and interpret it.
Of course.
No, but also let me be very clear on this, Sharad. Which is that a country like India, which is very diverse, it's very diverse in terms of
Everything.
not of everything, but most particularly in terms of expenditures.
Right.
We do know from history that if you take the average expenditure of different states, the difference is about 40 to 50% between the lowest state and the highest state. Right?
Okay.
Now you can't use the same rupee number as a poverty line for each of them. Okay? You can have a national single number.
Exactly.
You have to break it down to each state,
And as I said,
preferably sub-state.
yeah.
All right? For that, you need price data, which will enable you to do so. It isn't clear that price data actually exists.
No. Look, I mean,
No. Now, the CPI is a complex problem. I mean, we'll come to that.
But and we've talked earlier.
We've
as
talked
well
about it. So that data has to be rejigged to be able to do this. But the national one is never a problem.
Right. So, in fact, I think it was just today or yesterday that the DPIIT secretary also mentioned that they're trying to come up with a producer price index. Do you think that will help?
No, not for this particular discussion.
Okay.
Okay, for the GDP, yes,
big time.
All right.
big time, right? But good luck to DPIIT.
Good luck.
We've been trying this for 20 years,
Okay.
right? And the problem with the producer price index is no producer wants to give you his price. That's a part of his marketing strategy, which he's not willing to give you. The wholesale price you can get because you're getting it at the first point of sale.
Right.
Right?
But,
So it's a market data.
But other countries, first is right, but other countries, most countries have a producer price
they do.
index. So
Of course
what
they
is so special about our...
No, Surjit, let's be very clear on this. They compel release of that
So we
information.
should.
No, now we have the Collection Statistics Act in which there are penal provisions for not providing the data. Right? We haven't invoked it to be.
Yeah, we haven't enforced it.
So that
Yeah,
should
of
happen.
course.
We should be a little more strict.
Yeah.
That's a political call, frankly.
Okay.
No,
Because
everything comes down to political. But we've got to face it.
It's going to throw up a huge amount of resistance.
Of course. People don't want to share these kind of things.
This kind of information.
They don't want to
No.
tell you how much they earn. They don't want to
You
tell
know,
you.
let me correct both of you. Look, the same argument is made. So, for example, in a producer price index, you have several firms. Each firm's price doesn't go in there, or the information is not made available. It's like income tax data, another piece of data that would be superbly useful. And I've been at least arguing for another decade on this.
To make it public, at least the aggregate.
Exactly. Take a random 1% sample
10%.
and with complete anonymity, you don't know anything else, but you have a sample as to who the actual taxpayers are. Now, we are released, starting in 17, 18, we started releasing summary data.
Yes.
And quite detailed and very useful.
Right.
But why not, a unit level data on tax? Again, there is the arguments I heard, and Pronab was, oh my God, somebody will find out how much Ambani is earning. I don't
That's
know
rubbish.
what.
There's no way, yeah.
I don't understand
certainly
these
don't.
arguments, and I think governments, and this has happened across for the last 20 years, at least that I've been interacting with Indian governments, and they're all very, But I think, look, last 20 years, India's grown a lot. India has improved a lot, and I think the time is now.
So then maybe just simply creating awareness is what is needed. You need to teach people that your data is not going to be shared. Please.
No, don't say people need to be. The policymakers
Right.
need to be convinced. People are convinced. I don't think here we are, representative sample,
Well,
and we all believe. But it's the policymakers who influenced by what I don't know, but they are the ones making and have made this argument, and it should change.
Okay, so I mean, to sum up, what I can get is that we need to update our poverty line.
We need to-
Well, first we need a poverty
we
line.
need a poverty line.
Yeah.
It needs to be updated. It needs to be pegged to some more accurate, more recent measures. We need a census.
Yes.
Policymakers need to be a little more strict about, when they're collecting data, they need to maybe compel is the wrong word, but they need to convince people to share data accurately. But do you feel that all of this can be achieved soon? Yesterday, but no, not when it needed to have been done, but can it be done?
Yeah, I mean, look,
It can be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's something for Modi 3.0, this new government to focus on.
Yeah.
But on that note, thank you both so much. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
You're welcome.